Central Asia and the territory of modern northern China is the homeland of the Huns, the ancestors of the Turks. In ancient times, a single family of nomads was divided into the Huns, Turks, and Tungus, as well as the Manchus, Dunhu, and Xianbi, the ancestors of the Mongols. Basically, the ancient nomads led a similar lifestyle, lived in felt yurts, raised domestic animals, and ate milk and meat from domestic animals. However, there were differences in the way the deceased were buried. For example, the Huns buried the dead in pits dug in the ground. The Tunguzes left the dead unburied on the ground, or tied them to trees. According to the Kazakh historian Maral Tampiev, the Chinese sources mention the ancestors of the Huns, who were called Sinan, in chronicles dating back to 2700 BC. The Chinese emperor Huangdi fought against the nomads, Hienun Sinon. Thus, the ancestors of the Turks almost 3,000 years BC entered into relations with the Chinese civilization, waged wars, concluded an armistice. These facts increase the chronological framework of the history of the Turks by almost 3,000 years. Records of the Huns in Chinese sources date back to 1400 BC. In the 3rd century BC, the Huns began to create a centralized state. The first Khagan of the Huns was Duman. According to Chinese sources, Mode became the emperor of the Huns in 209 BC. According to the British historian Edward Parker, Mode's real name was Bahadur. The full title of the Khagan was Tengri Kutu Zhanye, the messenger of the eternal sky. Mode Bahadur created a huge empire from Korea to eastern Turkestan. He conquered the southern territories from China, which had previously been taken away from the Huns. Mode was the great conqueror of Asia. He ruled from 209 to 174 BC. China could not withstand the onslaught of the Huns and began to pay tribute to them annually. Chinese emperor built the Great Wall to protect his lands from the Huns, the bloodline, along which millions of human lives were laid. China could not overcome the nomads by force, and through bribery split the ranks of the Huns. In 48 BC, the southern Huns elected their Khagan and separated from the northern Huns. The southern Huns became vassals of China and began to fight against the northern Huns. The northern Hunnic Kaganate, after 300 years of its existence, disintegrated in 160. Part of the northern Huns went to the territory of Kazakhstan. The other part went to the Volga River. The rest remained on the territory of Mongolia. In 370 AD, the Huns launched an offensive from the Volga to the west. They defeated the Alans, the Germanic tribes of the Goths and the Gepids. In 395, the Huns invaded the East Roman Empire. In 422, the Huns conquered Pannonia, Hungary, and reached the Rhine River. In 434, Attila, Adil, the son of Rua, became the Khagan of the Huns. In 437, the Huns conquered the Germanic kingdom of the Burgundians. Theodosius, emperor of East Roman Empire, made peace with the Huns on difficult terms with the payment of tribute. In 451, the Huns began a war against the Western Roman Empire. Attila invaded Gaul, modern France, in July 451. The Battle of the Huns against the Romans took place in the Cataluan fields. It was the largest battle in the history of mankind, with a huge number of victims on both sides. There were no winners. The Huns and Romans retreated to their positions. In 452, having crossed the Alps, Attila invaded Italy. Having seized the north of the country, the Huns approached Rome. Emperor Valentinian sent an embassy led by Pope Leo to Attila to request peace. The Pope asked Attila to spare Rome, a city with world culture, with the payment of tribute on any terms. Attila spared Rome. So diplomacy saved Rome. Pope Leo was canonized by the Church, becoming saint and great. In the medieval German ballad, the Saga of the Nibelungs, Attila was described as a German king under the name Etzel. In 453, Attila died, and the empire began to disintegrate. In 311, the southern Huns, who had separated from the northern Huns earlier, in 48, under the leadership of Liu Zhong, a descendant of the Hunnish Khagans, captured the Chinese capital of Luoyang, the Jin Empire, and became the rulers of northern China. The Hunnish dynasties ruled northern China until 350, about 40 years. The Turkic clan, Toba, Tabgachi, roamed north of the Chinese wall. In the 4th century, the clan strengthened, and in 422 captured the Chinese capital Luoyang, becoming Chinese emperors of the new Toba Wei dynasty. The dynasty gradually took over China. In 534, the Toba dynasty split into eastern and western branches, which ruled China until 588. The Toba Wei dynasty ruled China for almost 160 years. Hephthalites were nomadic Turks who lived in the territory of East Turkestan. In the 5th century, the Hephthalites strengthened their state and launched an offensive to the southwest, capturing the cities of Kucha, Kashgar, Khotan, Karashar, then advanced westward, capturing Sogdiana. In 425, the Hephthalites invaded Bactria, displacing the Yuezhi, the descendants of the Aryans. After the capture of Bactria, the Hephthalites began to fight against Sasanian Iran with varying success. In 483, the Hephthalites defeated the Sassanids and concluded a truce with the Persians, who began to pay tribute to the Hephthalites. In the period from 503 to 513, the Hephthalites resumed wars against Sasanian Iran. In 460, the Hephthalites began the conquest of North India under the leadership of the commander Toraman. Toraman turned out to be an outstanding commander. In 470, Toraman began a war against the Indian Gupta Empire, which he completely destroyed. In 500, Khan Toraman was recognized as the supreme ruler of northern and central India. In 532, the Indians revolted against the Hephthalites and overthrew them in 542. Thus, the Hephthalites ruled India for almost 70 years. In 568, the Hephthalites were defeated by the Turkic Kaganate and the Hephthalite State disintegrated. In 552 AD, the Ashina clan united the Turkic tribes into a single state. The spiritual worldview of the Turks, like their ancestors the Huns, was Tengrianism, the veneration of the great god Tengri. Bumin became the first Kagan in 552. A year later, his son Mugan became the second Kagan, who was one of the most prominent Turkic Kagans. In 568, the Turks defeated the Turks' Hephthalite State in Central Asia. In 578, the Turks launched a military invasion of China. China was defeated and paid tribute. In 580, a huge Turkic empire was created from Korea to the Caucasus. Chinese diplomacy, by bribing the Turkic nobility, split the Turkic Kaganate. In 600, the Kaganate split into Eastern and Western. In 630, the Eastern Kaganate suffered an unexpected defeat from China and lost its independence. In 604, Tun Jabgu Khan became the Khan of the Western Kaganate, with a headquarters in the city of Chach, Tashkent. In 626, he started a war against Iran. In 628, Tun Jabgu Khan invaded Transcaucasia, defeated the Persian and Georgian troops, capturing Tbilisi. In 631, Tun Jabgu Khan died, and the turmoil began in the Western Kaganate. In 640, the Western Turks were defeated and fell into vassal dependence on China. In 679, the Turks of the Eastern Kaganate revolted against the Chinese Empire. They said, "We were a sovereign, imperial people. Where is our state?" In 701, the Turks defeated the Chinese troops. In 703, the Tang Empire made peace with the Turks. In 744, the Aryans Dynasty was replaced by the Uyghur Kaganate Khan. In 744, the Oghuz Turks created a new state, the Uyghur Kaganate. Moyanchur created the Turkic tribes of Tatars, Karaluks, Basmals, and Turgeshes by force, creating a large state from western Manchuria to the Black Irtish. In 755, a civil war broke out in China. The rebels inflicted a number of defeats on government forces. The Chinese emperor from the Tang dynasty turned to the Khagan Moyanchur for help. In 765, the intervention of the Uyghur Turks in China ended with the suppression of the uprising. The population decline was enormous. According to the census, it dropped from 53 million to 17 million people by 36 million due to wars and epidemic. China paid tribute to the Uyghur Kaganate in the amount of 20,000 pieces of silk annually. In 840, the country suffered natural disasters. The Kyrgyz invaded the country. The Kaganate fell apart. In 562, Khagan Bayan created the state of the Turks Avars, who had not previously recognized the power of the great Turkic Kaganate. The Avars moved westward from the Turks and conquered the Turkic tribes that remained after the collapse of the Attila Empire, as well as the Germanic and Slavic tribes in southeastern Europe. In a short time, the Avars created a huge state in southeastern Europe. Since 582, the Avars have been constantly waging wars with Byzantium. In 788, the Franco-Avar War began, which lasted until 800. The Avars were defeated. In 800, the Avar Kaganate disintegrated. In 651, Turun Khan from the Turkic dynasty of Ashina created the Khazar State with its capital on the Volga River. The Kaganate occupied the territory from the Dnieper River in the west to the territory of modern Kazakhstan. In 652, the Khazar State began a war against the Arab Caliphate, which intermittently lasted 150 years. In 985, the Kiev prince Sviatoslav, together with Oghuz Turks, defeated the Khazars. Thus, the Ashina Turkic dynasty, which had a 400-year history, ended its existence. In 962, the Turkic commander Alptegin created a new state in the city of Gazana, modern Afghanistan. In 977, the new ruler, Sebuktegin, began the conquest of India. In 1009, his son Sultan Mahmud conquered India up to the Indus River. Then in the north, he conquered the Iranian state of the Samanids in Central Asia. In 1025, Sultan Mahmud created a huge empire from the Aral Sea in the north to the Indian Ocean in the south. From 1040, fratricidal wars began against the Seljuk Turks, which led to the weakening of the Kaganate. In 1190, the Ghaznavid State ceased to exist. At the end of the 10th century, the migration of the Oghuzes began from the territory of Kazakhstan to the southwest to Iran. In 1071, at the Battle of Manzikert in Asia Minor, the Seljuks defeated the army of the Byzantine Emperor Diogenes. Mass migration of Oghuz Turks to Asia Minor began. In 1090, Sultan Melik Shah created a huge empire from Lake Issyk-Kul in the east to the Red and Mediterranean Sea in the west, from the Aral Sea in the north to the Indian Ocean in the south. In 1092, Sultan Malik Shah died. In 1195, the empire fell apart. The great conqueror Temujin united the Turkic and mixed Turkic-Tungus tribes into a single state after victories over the Naimans and Kirates. Temujin became a great Khan and received a new name, Genghis Khan. In 1211, a war broke out against northern China. In 1215, Beijing was captured, and a peace treaty was eventually signed. In 1220, Genghis Khan conquered the Khwarezm Shah Empire in Central Asia and led a campaign to India. In 1227, Genghis Khan died, leaving the empire to 4 sons, Jochi, Chagatai, Ogadei, and Tuli. According to the Kazakh researcher Maral Tampiev, the state language of the empire of Genghis Khan was the Turkic language. All written sources of the 13th through 14th century were written in the Turkic language. By his opinion, the term Mengu in the Chinese sources means dark or ignorant. It was not a national, but a political term. The Chinese called nomads, the Turks in Tungus, as Mongols, Mughals. Russian historians mistakenly call the Turks Mongols in the 13th century, misleading the entire historical world. The overwhelming majority of the population of the Genghis Khan Empire was Turkic, with a small number of Mongols, between whom there was no division. Modern Mongols as a people formed later, in the 15th through 17th centuries after the settlement of the territory of Mongolia by the Tungus-speaking tribes. The territory of Mongolia was inhabited by the Huns and Turks during the time of the Hunnish Kaganate in the 3rd century BC. Mongolia was also the territory of the Turkic and Uyghur Kaganates from the 6th to the 9th century. In the period from the 10th to the 12th century, the states of the Naiman Turks and Kirit Turks were located in Mongolia. Archaeologists have not found Mongolian burials in Mongolia dating back to the 13th and 14th centuries. The primary sources written by Plano Carpini, Guillaume Rubec, Marco Polo, as well as Russian sources, 13th century, do not contain a single mention of the Mongols, leaving only information about the Tatars. The sons of Genghis Khan created the following states. Genghis Khan's grandson Batu created a huge state from the Danube River in the west to the Irtysh River in the east. The state existed until 1502. Genghis Khan's grandson Kublai conquered all of northern and southern China and united it into a single state. The Venetian traveler Marco Polo, who lived at the court of Kublai Khan in the 13th century, wrote that Kublai Khan corresponded in the Turkic language. In 1368, the Chinese people revolted and overthrew the last emperor, Togon Temir, who fled to Mongolia with the remaining troops. Genghis Khan's son Chagatai inherited lands from Lake Balkhash in the south to Amir Darya River, the cities of Bukhara and Samarkand on the south, as well as eastern Turkestan. The state existed until the beginning of the 16th century. In 1258, Hulagu, together with the troops of the Golden Horde Khan, captured Baghdad, destroyed the 500-year-old Abbasid dynasty. Hulagu created a new state, including northwestern Iran and Azerbaijan, with the capital in the city of Tabriz. In 1340, Hulagu's state collapsed. Babur, the grandson of the great conqueror Timur, conquered northern India in 1529, becoming the founder of the Mughal Empire. The Turks were called Mughals at that time. Babur's grandson, Akbar, conquered the whole of India by uniting it into a single state. Under Akbar, the state flourished in India. The decline of the empire began in the 18th century. In 1858, the British captured India. The Mughal Empire lasted over 300 years. Thus, the great dynasty of the great conqueror Timur came to an end. In the 13th century, the Turks Oghuz migrated from the territory of Central Asia to Asia Minor. Sultan Osman, who gave the name to the Turkic nation, began to unite the Oghuzes into a single state. In 1453, Sultan Mehmed II captured Constantinople, renaming it Istanbul, laying the foundation for the Ottoman Empire. Sultan Mehmed II expanded the Ottoman Empire in Asia, Europe, and Africa. During the reign of Suleiman the Magnificent, the empire had reached enormous proportions, capturing territories in Asia, Europe, and Africa. In the 18th century, the empire began to lose its conquered territories and gradually fade away. In 1922, the Ottoman Empire collapsed. Turkish leader Ataturk created a new Turkish state. In the first millennium of our era, the Turks conquered vast territories and created new states throughout Eurasia. The culture of the Turks merged with the culture of peoples who spoke Indo-European languages. Many nations underwent the process of Turkic assimilation and adopted the Turkic language. Turkic assimilation lasted until the middle of the second millennium, about 1500 years. The ethnic mixing of the Turks with the Indo-European peoples led to a change in the anthropological type of the Turks, which ranges from the Mongoloid type in the east of Eurasia to the Caucasian anthropological type in Turkey and Iran. In Central Asia, East Turkestan, and Kazakhstan, the Turanian anthropological type was formed, transitional between the Mongoloid and Caucasian races, which developed in the process of their ethnic mixing. Kazakhs, Uzbeks, Uyghurs, Kyrgyz, Tatars, and other Turkic peoples belong to the Turanian or South Siberian anthropological type. The mixing of the cultures of the Turks and other peoples took place over the centuries. In 1815, the German linguist Friedrich von Dietz drew attention to the semantic similarity of the quatrains of Homer's ancient Greek epic, the Iliad and the Odyssey, with the ancient Turkic epic, Korkut Ata. Although the languages were different, ancient Greek and ancient Turkic. The ancient Greeks Achaeans, who lived in the Black Sea steppes, related to the Scythians and the Sarmatians, migrated to the Balkan Peninsula and conquered the territory of modern Greece. The Turks, who conquered Kazakhstan and Central Asia in the first millennium, assimilated the indigenous population, as a result of which the cultures of the ancient Turks and Aryans, Scythians, and Sarmatians merged. Sultan Mahmud, who ruled the Ghaznavid Empire, ordered the Persian poet Ferdowsi to create the epic Shahnameh form, the Book of Kings, a masterpiece of world literature, where the Turkic and Iranian epic traditions and cultures merged. The Turkic world had a huge impact on the history of the development of world civilization. According to the Russian historian Lev Gumilyov, the Turks is one of the super ethnic groups in world history. Currently, there are about 200 million Turks in the world. These are Turks, Azerbaijanis, Uzbeks, Uyghurs, Tatars, Bashkirs, Altai, and Kazakhs. Kazakhs represent one of the peoples who have preserved the language and customs that are closest to the nomadic traditions of the ancient Turks.